Himali, we good to go.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone. I'm Himali Nalwal from NBQP, Quality Council of India, welcoming all the participants to this webinar on the topic Theory of Constraints and Approach to Increase Productivity. But before moving to this webinar, let me give you a brief introduction of QCI. Quality Council of India was established as an autonomous body under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry with the vision of creating an ecosystem for quality. QCI is led by the dynamic leadership of our chairman, Mr. Adil Zainulbhai, and Secretary General, Dr. Ravi P. Singh. As an apex quality organization, QCI has 5 constitutional boards. National Accreditation Board for Certification Bodies, NABCB. National Accreditation Board for Education and Training, NABET. National Accreditation Board for Hospital and Healthcare Provider, NABH. National Accreditation Board for Testing and Calibration Laboratories, NABL, and National Board for Quality Promotion, NBQP. This webinar is also brought to you by NBQP. QCI also has special project divisions, including Project Planning and Implementation Division, PPID, Project Analysis and Documentation Division, PADD, Zero Defect and Zero Effect Division, Z, and Training and Capacity Building Cell, TCB cell. With all its constituent boards and division, QCI continuously leads its mission of a national-wide quality movement. Our today's webinar is another bit for this vision of QCI. It is on the topic Theory of Constraints and Approach to Increase Productivity. The theory of constraints, TOC, is a methodology for identifying the most important limiting factor that stands in the way of achieving a goal, and then systematically improving that constraint until it is no longer the limiting factor. The theory of constraints has its own mindset, methods, and measurements that complete the whole body of knowledge that makes the practice of TOC application easy and practical. This webinar aims to provide knowledge on TOC, its measurements, how to identify constraints, and the concept of cache constraints. To take you through these topics, we have with us Mr. Shishir Bharadwaj, an innovative consultant who guides manufacturing companies to develop their own capabilities for developing applications and tools with the current resources, which can be put them in the process of ongoing improvement. Identifying strategic pathways for companies to grow without ever feeling that their process and management approach has outlived their aspirations. He focuses on effective system selection, design, and implementation. His thinking and system design are deeply rooted in the theory of constraints. Worked in district manufacturing industries for 27 years and teaches that the system approach to operation management is the only panacea for a quantum jump in productivity that the industry seeks. He is the trainer of master trainers for the Z maturity assessment model of QCI and the creator of the manufacturing competitiveness e-learning courses on the Swayam portal. I am sure that you will all be beneficial from his knowledge today. So over to you, sir. Welcome.
Okay, if I'm audible and visible both, just let me know. Okay. Okay. So thank you so much, Himali, for a nice and elaborate introduction. I hope I do have the presence of some of my old participants who would just be going through the revision of my introduction. But it's always nice to have people back on this webinar. We try to make sure that we focus on a very narrow part in the webinar and leave the participants with an idea what can be done with it. And we hope that participants would later on join us on a full day or 2-day training program that is initiated post these webinars. So what Himali has just said or put in front of us is a whole scope of what TOC can do. She mentioned mindsets, methodologies, and measurements. all three of them in itself would be a 3-day training program. But what I'll try and do here is focus on a small part with a small example to bring that, that aha feeling with the participants, that, it is such a simple thing and we were missing out. So what I try to do in most of these webinars is to put across a very small and a simple example so that people are given to understand that if we achieve this simplicity, we have adequate knowledge. How do you get the knowledge? Yes, that is hard work that requires elaborate training. And we hope that you all will look forward to joining us on further of our TOC based training programs. And TOC, as it is popularly known, the full name is Theory of Constraints. It sounds very big, but in fact, the reason why this name had to be given to TOC is it was taking a path of, you can say, a path less traveled or a counterintuitive path to the current practice. Now, that is why the full body of knowledge had to be developed and put in the market. And like we say with body of knowledge, it keeps improving over a period of time. We have very good applications right now which people can practice or adopt. However, today we will look at the fundamentals, and I'll try to keep it simple and to make sure that you live with those fundamentals. So when I go and talk about productivity or how to increase productivity, or uh, Himali also mentioned about cash constraint. Okay, the fact remains that how you identify the cash constraint, I may not be able to teach you what you will do with the cash constraint, how you get over with it. But when I try to explain increasing productivity, you will know that it is about increasing the cash flow. That means it is getting rid of the cash constraint also. So, in other words, I will speak out before I start my PPT. TOC seeks to look for that inherent simplicity in the whole complex environment that governs your throughput, right? So when I said that through productivity increase, it will impact your cash constraint, it will increase the cash flow. This is the simplicity we are looking at. If we focus at increasing productivity, we know that other things will follow suit. Fine. So we know that we'll be having this webinar from 11 to 12:15, 12:30. We shall take in questions at 12:15 onwards. However, should anybody think that his or her question is absolutely important, you can electronically raise your hand, and I'm sure somebody will be reading the chat box, and I should be able to answer that question. Is that okay, Pooja, or something needs to be added from your side?
It's fine, Shashir.
It's fine. Okay, Ashish. So I have the capability, right? Just give me a minute. Just give me a minute, and I'll be back. Okay, fine. We are through. Uh, so I just need to share, right? Share, and I need to go for my Windows or full screen Windows. Okay, I have. Can we see this? Can we see this?
Yes.
Okay, is the volume good?
Yes.
Okay, here. So, good morning once again to all of you, and I hope I can say good afternoon by the time we finish too. Okay, we've heard of theory of constraints, and why is it such a talked about subject? Because theory of constraints is universally applicable. Now, when I say universally applicable, that means it is applicable to a project-based organization, it's applicable to a retail organization, it's applicable to a manufacturing organization, it's applicable to food industry, it's applicable to auto industry, it's applicable to electronics industry. Now, this body of knowledge has its principles very similar to what any other previous practices were about, like manufacturing practices like Ford production system, or for that matter, the Toyota production system. Now, the reason why theory of constraints thrives or is well appreciated is because it has in its midst the whole three elements that make it a theory. That is the mindsets, methodologies, and measurements. It is this measurements which is lacking in Ford production system or Toyota production system, which is causing a huge, when I say huge, I say really huge misinterpretations of what was the intent of the systems. That means what the systems try to achieve. Because it's very simple thing like, you tell me how to behave and you measure me the wrong way, naturally I will behave the way the measurements force me to. So if the focus of a Toyota production system is on achieving a throughput or reducing the time of throughput, if you start measuring it on cost, it's quite likely that you're going to increase the throughput time. So if the measurement of a Ford production system is how to get cars out of the production system as soon as possible, and you start talking about efficiency, okay, again, you are measuring the system in a wrong way. Just, I need, can, just give me a minute here. Okay. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir,
Yes,
you
sir.
are.
Yes,
Just
sir.
give me
You
a
are
minute.
audible.
Okay. Am I back? Can,
Yes, sir.
is my slide being seen now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, fine. So with that, let me begin. Now, usually there are three fundamental questions. Now we're talking about managing an organization. We're not talking about managing a small production line or a marketing department or a sales department for that matter. So we always begin at the fundamental purpose. What is the goal of an organization? If you are managing an organization, what you're managing it, that means what you're managing it for. What is the goal of the organization? Second is, if you know the goal, how do you measure the performance? That means how much of goal are you achieving? And the third is, how do we know that the future is secure? These are the three fundamental questions which plague most of the organizations. So sometimes people say profit is my goal. Sometimes people say, looking after my human resource is the goal of my organization and things like that. However, measuring the motivation of human resource is extremely tough. So how do you know you're doing good? I would argue that this is not the best measurement to keep in place unless you are, you've got enough resources in your pocket to keep dreaming about how to measure human performance. And most of the organizations have limited resource. So I would advise that it is very good that you keep a tangible measurement, which will tell you exactly how your organization is performing. Even though you might be doing very well today, how do you know that you're going to perform well tomorrow? How do you know that you'll not be beaten by the competition tomorrow? These are the three questions which force us to think in a way which gives us confidence. Any thought process which does not clarify these three questions is only creating chaos. So it is very nice to talk about lofty organizations' goal. And many people, when they can't talk about money, because in our society, talking about money as a goal is still considered a taboo. And most of us cannot get a good proxy for money in our society. So we don't talk about money and we talk about something else. However, how to keep your employees happy? If the organization doesn't make money, you don't pay the people money, naturally they'll go somewhere. And if people are not happy, how is the customer happy? So ultimately, you will realize that a tangible measurement of money making capability of the organization is probably a very good goal to keep. Now, we have talked about the goal should be clear. We should know how to measure the performance so we know how to take corrective action, and we should also be doing things which secure our future. That means if you should be making profit, the profit should be good enough to ensure future profits also. Okay, now let us see what we are plagued with. Now we see a combination of these facts in our organization, and most of it goes unexplained. What are this? There's a large sales backlog, but lots of excess inventory. We know how many orders are late. People are always having meetings, sales meetings or dispatch meetings. Okay. And still they have excess inventory lying in their finished goods store. The plant capacity is constrained, but warehouses are full of finished goods. We're talking about there's a capacity constraint, sir. There's too much of demand, but still the warehouses are full of finished stock. The third one of my favorites, the plant is on plan, sales are not. But the plant's plan was based on and derived from the sales plan. So you have a whole organization working which develops a robust sales plan and gives it to the production people, and the production people buy, source, manufacture everything to that plan. Okay, but the sales are not achieved as much. That means there's a lag, which leads to the fourth point. Net profit is on target, but there's no cash available. We need more efficient equipment to be able to supply to the demand. So if we don't have efficient equipments, how do we meet the demand? This is a mindset arising from that if we don't have low cost product, how do we satisfy the demand? And to my surprise, one of my clients just told me that for so long the marketing has been telling us to reduce the cost, and we have managed to reduce the cost of our production, and suddenly the demand has evaporated. What does it tell me? It tells me that this was a hypothetical assumption which the management had taken, that low cost means high demand. It is very clear that demand does not constitute cost. It constitutes many other things. And just because it was convenient in the Indian mindset to focus on low cost means high demand. Okay. So all this is getting true. Okay. Now what explains all these behaviors that we see? And when I've listed all these behaviors impact your ability to make money. If you don't have cash, today you are declared bankrupt. How come you have net profit but no cash? Most of the NPAs, the companies are in profit, but they're non-performing assets. How is it that the plan that the plant works on does not meet the sales target, but it has been derived from the sales target itself? This explains the mystery that somewhere down the line we are only doing or going about compromising or finding a trade-off, what we call optimizing in any other word. This is how we are managing a company. We have a company on the top, we break it down into departments, right? And we give every department a target to achieve. And they achieve their targets. And though they have achieved their targets, these unexpected combinations of facts also exist. The only conclusion you can come to by this is that something is wrong the way we are managing our company. But we are never told to look at company as a whole. We focus on parts of the companies. In fact, our MBA programs also designed the same way. They are not designed to manage the company. They're designed to manage HR or marketing or finance. Okay, sales, maintenance, and stores is called non-sexy subject. Okay, so very few people would like to go into supply chain management. Supply chain management is looked as an operational level. Yes, because it is not taught properly. It is taught as a combination of production, stores, maintenance, a purchase, etc. Combination, not as a synchronized whole. So the way we are managing company is leading us to all those unexpected results, and they're troubling us. Though we have department-wise measurement of our performances, I find still the companies not having answers to these points here. What causes a poor due date performance? Why do you have long lead times? Why are the inventories too high? Why is the payback period long? Why there are too many customer complaints? And why there are too many meetings? In other words, how is your human relationship working? and usually it is called bad because the marketing guy is always against the production guy, the production against the purchase guy, the production against the maintenance guy. These are called bad human relationships. And we try to develop matrices which are going to make sure that such performances are measured. It's actually trying to find a compromise rather than find a solution. Still, our management system does not explain all this. Let us see how do we attack it. So what happens is we have these problems, and when I said this is a problem, the management approach is let's take the aspect on the left and write the undesirable effects. So in production logistics, undesirable effect is inventories are too high. Service, customer complaints. Finance, long payback periods. People, bad internal relationships. Very easy for us to begin. We take the departments that we have divided the company into, find the undesirable effects. And how do we take it further? We then copy initiatives, or as we call, very nice subjects. So if it is production related, we'll do JIT, sir. We will do supply chain management. We will do TQM. If we do, if there's a service related issue, we will do customer relationship management. All these terms are called terminologies at the best. By doing a set of activities, you never do management, you do administration. So what we have done is we have taken the four departments and we have these four undesirable effects. Against that, we initiate improvements everywhere. So for every department, there is improvement plan. And in the best of the scenarios, we'll say that we have a process of ongoing improvement in place. We are working on everything. We have improved everything. And our departments have worked. However, there is a side effect of all this. The side effect of all this is you've stretched yourself too thin. Which management has the capability or the resources to deploy so much of effort on all the aspects? Unless and only unless the management thinks that any change in production is not going to impact finances. In other words, the management is so convinced that every department works in itself. It is not a set of dependent activities, which is what I wanted to bring your attention to, that in a manufacturing system, it is a set of dependent activities that produce the throughput. You cannot isolate or break or manage a sub part thinking that you land up managing a whole part. And this is what the current management practice is doing. And hence, the productivity increase is not a productivity increase, it's called an efficiency. And that also a local efficiency. So an improvement in finance does not impact the overall company performance because it's local. An improvement in customer relationship does not impact the overall company performance. Why? Because it's local. And when we have two conflicting things, we look for a compromise. And the technical word for this compromise is optimize. And what it does is it takes the path of least resistance. That means make sure that both the objectives that we think are must in an organization should be maintained in status quo and the balance should be done. So when we're taking a path of least resistance, we go sometimes in one direction and then sometimes in second direction to manage the balance. Just like a balance. If the weight is shifting on one pan, you try and increase the load on the other pan. Okay. And we make sure that the balance is there. And this is what, in other words, is called an optimization solution. So inventory is good, inventory is bad. We are stuck with this. We don't have a correct reasoning to say which quantity of inventory should we have. But we know that sometimes inventory is good, sometimes inventory is bad. When I look at the financial performance, the inventory is good. But when I look at the customer service, inventory is bad. So what I do is I optimize the inventory. This is called the ignorance of science. However, this is what I put here, that compromise is not a solution. What inventory should be there is the solution to the inventory problem, not a bimodal behavior of inventory that fluctuates from minimum to maximum because of your ordering and behavior. Argument is managing an organization an art or a science? If you are a person who thinks it is art, you will land up developing all sorts of complicated, complex, articulative solutions which cannot be measured. And if you are a person who thinks that art is a science, sorry, management is a science, that means you're looking towards very simple solutions. Now, one can oscillate between them, but the idea is that if you have science as your approach to managing organizations, the chances are that you land up simplifying the complexity in an organization. So, the first one, sorry, easily this approach of looking at organization as a science or as an art leads us to two types of management approaches. First approach is all the problems that we have in the organization is because of variability, right? If a people behave the way we were told, if the suppliers delivered on time, if the production produced in time, if the quality was okay, all this is nothing but it's called variability. And we try to reduce the variability. And the biggest effort we try to put it is in human skills. We know there's going to be variability and we try to reduce the variability by training them. Okay. Now, so the first approach is there's variability everywhere. Okay, and we will look at reducing variability everywhere. This is the conclusion of the table I showed you before, where I was saying that we look at reducing variability everywhere, whether it is service, finance, customer relationships, or logistics. Okay, so then the second approach is naturally a much different approach, which is 180-degree opposite to reducing variability, okay, which can cause a big jump in performance in a short period of time. Why? Because you're not focusing everywhere, your resources are not spread thin, okay, and you don't focus on reducing or controlling variability everywhere, okay. You provide focus on where to reduce variability. So the second part is very different from the first, because first said that we improve everywhere, which is what also Kaizen gets interpreted as. We reduce variability everywhere, and if we reduce variability everywhere, okay, we will improve the performance. The second approach says no, reduction of variability everywhere does not improve your performance. Your performance is improved only when you know where to focus to reduce variability. And that is why the two approaches are 180-degree opposite. This is actually explained by the chain analogy better. Okay, the first approach is called the cost world. Okay, where we think that if we reduce weight of the chain everywhere, okay, we are reducing the cost, where weight is analogous to the cost of the organization. And we think reducing cost will improve my profits. However, the management implications are global improvement is a sum total of all small improvements. So if you go by the first approach, variability everywhere, reduce variability, okay? The chain analogy says that you are looking at chain and to improve the performance of chain, you think if I make the chain cheaper, okay, I have a better chain. And the management implication is global improvements is sum total of all small improvements. And the second important is that treating every function as independent, which is what I started off with when I said the company is broken down into departments. The second approach is called the throughput world approach. Okay, here we don't talk about the weight of the chain as the performance matrix, we talk about the performance or the strength of the chain. Okay, the management implications are global improvements, not the sum of all local improvements. All functions a set of dependent events. Till the time we don't start looking at the purpose for which the chain was designed and all the links are dependent on each other, we cannot cause the strength of the chain to increase. And we also know if we have to look at the strength of the chain, not the weight of the chain, then the strength of the chain is equal to the strength of the weakest link. So we know where to focus. Any improvement in weakest link will jump the performance of the chain. This is what we call the holistic approach. And to put it simply, why should we need a holistic approach? The most important understanding is changing part of a system may have significant implications, that is positive as well as negative, on other parts. This is the example which I started off in the earlier part. I said that sometimes it happens that people think that increasing the performance of finance, okay, will increase the performance of the company. They don't know that it may impact production, it may impact inventory. Okay. The second aspect here is there are endless places where improvements are possible, but these activities require the use of limited resources. And then the ultimate question is, will all improvements improve the performance of the question? Oh, sorry. Then the most important question is, will all improvements improve the performance of an organization? If you ask this question to yourself, you will realize that many organizations who talk about Kaizen, Kaizen has become a joke. If there's a defect coming out, people say, "Acha, kisi ne Kaizen kar diya hoga." Okay. This is nothing but a result of everybody understanding that not all improvements cause an improvement in performance. Some are damaging also. So the only way to look at it is whatever you have done, does it impact the organization or not? This is what we call the holistic approach. The argument up till now has been that if we start looking at organization in small parts, individual parts, we are optimizing the sub parts, and hence we are sub optimizing the overall organization. So before we come down to talking about productivity, okay, one should have a working definition of productivity. And why I took so much of time in explaining the previous thing is because it is to do with the mindset of theory of constraints. And once we don't have the clear mindset, okay, we will always land up comparing this against the other. So we'll land up comparing subparts to subparts. But one should always know that it is the whole that is working, not the subparts. Having said that, let me come down and put across what does productivity mean. So what is productivity? The first thing about productivity is you should know what your goal is. And I tried to put across in the beginning that the goal of a company should be to make money today as well as tomorrow. Right? However, when we talked about productivity, it's good to have an understanding what is productivity. Otherwise, there's a confusion between efficiency and productivity. So, productivity is anything that takes you towards your goal faster is productivity. Making more of the throughput with the same resources is productivity. In other words, when we come to the throughput world, the cost world is different from the throughput world, and TOC is the throughput world. When we come to the throughput world, okay, if you are not able to create a throughput, that means you're not able to sell a product, you are not gaining any productivity increase. So first you have to increase the throughput. And if you keep increasing throughput while keeping your resource at the same level, is called productivity increase. Many people can say my local efficiency has gone up and they call it productivity. No, there's only one definition, okay, which I've given in 2 words here, 2 sentences here. Anything that takes you towards your goal faster is productivity. So one needs to decide, okay, what is the goal? Second, making more of the throughput. Throughput is nothing but a measurement of your goal, okay, with the same resources is productivity. Okay. Any questions till now? Any questions? I can't hear anything.
Sir,
Any
there's
questions?
nothing.
Nothing, na? Okay,
Sir, no
okay,
question. You
okay,
can
fine.
continue, sir.
ठीक है.
Yes.
Thank you. Like I said, that before you define your productivity, you should be clear what is the goal. Very simply put, goal is to make money today as well as tomorrow. And before I tried to explain the relationship, if you don't make money today, how do you pay your employees? So employees will be unhappy. If employees are unhappy, the customers are going to be unhappy. Should you make your goal as customer delightment or happiness of my employees, it's quite likely that you will not know where you are going. You'll have a general direction where you're going, but you'll not know how fast or slow you should go, because both the other goals of measuring employee satisfaction or customer satisfaction is not a very simple science. However, measuring the amount of money that you're making is a well known exercise. So, before we begin, there's always a sequence in one should go, the sequence in which one should go. And the sequence is guided by these three questions: what to change, what to change to, and how to cause the change. What to change is called the managerial know how, what to change to is called the operational know how, and how to cause the change is called the psychological know how. That means you should have your measurements, etc., in place so that the change is supported, not that the measurements are counter to the improvements you seek. Okay. We call theory of constraints. The word theory exists in front of constraints is because the three aspects of a theory are well represented in theory of constraints body of knowledge: the mindsets, measures, and methodology. I have touched upon a few of the mindsets till now. Measures is what I said is going to drive the psychological know how to cause the change. Because if you measure things correct and with the correct metric, you can push the rate of change. And that's why we say that the jump in productivity or in performance of an organization is very high if one understands the measures and how to use them. And then is methodology. Methodology is usually the point where we have different types of applications developed and how to use them. So methodologies can be done without a software, can be done with a software. It depends on how much of money you wants to spend. So the reason why we call it theory, because these three are done. Mindsets I've touched a bit. Measures I will need to touch because I need to talk about improvement in your productivity. Another example of mindsets of TOC. Pillar number one, inherent simplicity. Pillar number two, people are good. Pillar number three, win-win. Pillar number four, never say I know. Most of the solutions or the impact and performance are hindered in today's world because people think they know what the problem is, and somebody needs to give them a solution. That means they don't want to know what to change, they don't want to know what to change to, they want to answer only one question: how to cause the change. Making the first two irrelevant reduces the benefits that one can accrue. What is win-win? Every conflict can be resolved, every conflict can be removed, and below that is compromise is not a solution. So win-win is what we have been hearing of, but we have worded it differently here because we think people what they call win-win is nothing but a compromise. People are good. The measurements and policies drive behaviors. This is the second pillar I'm mentioning because I have seen hundreds of organizations you want to put lean. For example, they want to put lean practices in the system and they start measuring it based on cost. Never have we heard from Toyota that measuring the improvements as cost savings is the goal of lean. And this is what limits the improvement capabilities of lean as a practice. So basically, you're using a correct concept with a wrong measurement and you don't get the results. And then coming to the first pillar, which is probably the most important of the mindsets, it says every situation, no matter how complex it initially looks, is exceedingly simple. So till the time you have not come to this simple definition or this simple solution to a problem, keep working on it because you have yet not reached perfection. You have yet not found the solution. This is an example of the mindset of what TOC has. And for everything that you see here, there are books, there's knowledge, there's example, there are tools available for you to practice. So why is theory of constraints and holistic approach? Because what it's looking for within an organization is simplicity. In other words, within any complexity, there is an inherent simplicity that governs the throughput of any organization. And it is this thing which is governing the throughput. In other words, a constraint is what we need to find out and focus on to jump productivity. We have said that the goal of the company is to make money. That's what everybody starts off. This is called a high level thinking. But what we see is there are various levels of making money. Level one, people don't make money only. Level two, they have met all their financial commitments but not making profits. And three is making profits consistently but profits fluctuating. At level three is what we see most of the companies, their profits are fluctuating. If the profits are fluctuating, in other words, you don't know what governs the throughput. That means your focus on constraint is not there. In other words, you can't find out the inherent simplicity in the complex environment. You're focusing everywhere. And then, as we thought the three levels were enough, there are two more levels. So if a company has to be at the fifth level, profits and return on investments increasing year after year, okay, we need to make sure that we have ample and correct measurements which can guide us towards this. So what was the aim to just make profits? Many people think profits means making money, and I tried to show that the net profits are on target, but the cash is not there. So the problem happens is that the measurements that we're using to do our day-to-day operations are not adequate. So though we know that we have to make money, productivity is something that will take us towards making money. We are not sure what measurements to use so that we can take corrective actions. In other words, the measurements we use are not good. The measurements we use to measure our performance of the company, which is the global performance, not departmental performance, are ROI, net profit, and free cash flow. Okay. Again, these are accepted norms and these are good norms. ROI is a relative measurement, net profit is an absolute measurement, and free cash flow is called oxygen. Like I said before, most of the NPAs are of companies which are in profit but have no cash to pay the bills. Vendors get unpaid. Okay. But the book is showing profit. That is the accounting issue. And if we start using these profit measurements for making local decisions, okay, we are faced with these situations. Can you base your operational decisions on these measurements? Can you say on a shop floor that this is going to cause an increase in profit? Quite unlikely. So we start focusing on cost. Can you decide which products to make and sell based on these global measurements? Can every employee understand how his, her, or his action impacts the global measurements? Quite unlikely. Okay. So the problem is that the global measurements are true, but you cannot use them to run local decision making. And that is why the second aspect of measures of TOC comes into play. So what we're seeing here is we know that ROI is good for the company, net profit measurement is good for the company, and cash flow is good for the company. And they're good as long as they're going up. But we have a problem. We cannot convert them into local measurements. I don't know what decisions to take locally, which is going to increase my ROI. So what we see is a behavior developed in most organizations, and we call it the cost and intuition bridge. Cost we can calculate, so we are very good at it. Okay. Intuition is something which maybe fully developed, maybe partly developed. So cost and intuition, both of them sometimes are counterproductive, sometimes are in the same direction. So the decisions are okay. Intuition says do this, cost says don't do it. Okay. And this is nothing but the source of chaos in most organizations. That means if you don't know how you're going to measure me, don't expect me to behave anyway. So sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's intuition. And this is the dilemma that needs to be resolved and has been resolved by theory of constraints. In theory of constraints, we have simplified the complex web of measurements into just three measurements, and they're called throughput, inventory, and operation expense. Throughput is the rate at which the system generates money through sales. So when I said increase throughput with the same resources, that means in the same time you can make more of sales. Rate per unit time. Investment or inventory. All the money the system invests in purchasing things that the system intends to sell. Okay. So it is not only WIP, RM, or this, it's everything in together. And then operational expense. Operating expense is defined as all the money the system spends in turning inventory into throughput. You'll see here we're talking about system as a whole, not department. So all the money that the company spends or a system spends to convert inventory into throughput. So there's nothing called overheads. There's nothing called direct cost. There's nothing called cost allocation. There's nothing called consumables expression and things like that. Very simply put, all the money that the company spends. Okay. The cost of raw material, naturally, it goes into the cost of inventory. Rest everything comes into operating expense. What does it do? It just makes sure that we're looking at the system as a whole, not as departments. Now, the beauty of this measurement is what lies ahead. What is ROI? What is net profit? What is free cash flow? So for theory of constraints world, ROI is throughput, all the amount you have sold minus operating expenses divided by investment or inventory. This is how simple the decision making gets. Now you'll say that why did I define throughput, operating expense and inventory? Because if I have to give an order for my production people and say, listen, you have to book throughput, they know which item to sell out, naturally for which they have an order. An operating expense is the manager's capability of using the resources that one has to create throughput. And naturally, some money is stuck within the organization, which is called investment or inventory. Now we know that we have to increase throughput, decrease operating expense, and decrease inventory. What I've shown here is nothing but the global measurements. Now, how does global measurement get converted into local measurement is the next challenge that we were faced with before. So productivity for theory of constraints world is throughput divided by operating expense. Throughput is measured in rupees, operating expense is measured in rupees. A good ratio. So it's not like cost benefit analysis. You can put the benefits and then try to allocate rupee to it. Again, it's subjective. But here is very, very clear. How much of money have you earned through sales? Throughput divided by operating expense is productivity. And this is the part which I've been trying to explain, that how do you increase this productivity? So if you increase throughput without increasing operating expense, fantastic. You increased productivity. The second measurement is called inventory turns. Throughput divided by the inventory you had. And the third measurement is on time in full. So on time can only be booked if you book throughput. So TOC simplifies or suggests these three measurements. Okay. So in the first two, inventory terms and productivity, you see all the three measurements are used. Throughput divided by operating expense, and again throughput related to inventory. Because you're measuring throughput, operating expense, and inventory in the global measurements to find out the overall company performance. The same TOI, OE, and I can be used to run your day-to-day performance. How much of inventory did you buy? How much did you sell? Naturally, inventory turn is going to go up. And you can do these measurements every month. So instead of finding your global performance once in one quarter, you can do it every month. So you can have a 3 times better chance of correcting your mistakes. So what we have done in theory of constraints is the global performance in orange is related to local performance in green through the measurement bridge of throughput, OE, and I. Okay. I've talked about measurements. Now let me come down to the definition of a constraint. Okay. Anything that limits you from making more of your goal is called a constraint. And the goal is to make money. As a rider, constraint need not be a physical constraint. So in theory of constraints, we have various constraints: market, operations, supplier, policy, and cash. Why I have put all this in places? Because based on these constraints, there is a methodology available. Okay. So if you have an operations constraint, that means you have a production constraint or a logistics constraint, you will use our TOC based drum buffer rope and rapid replenishment methodologies. Okay. If you have a supplier problem, you will again have a rapid replenishment policy. Okay. If you have a policy constraint, you will use the thinking methodology. And if you have a cash constraint, you will follow the cash constraint methodology. So after you have identified the constraint which is limiting you from making money by using the correct measurements, okay, the measurements keep telling you how severe the constraint is, then you'll use one of these methodologies. Okay. Today we are talking about productivity. Okay. So let us say one of the examples is if you've identified as your operations as your capacity constraint or a constraint, the two other conditions that should be fulfilled is raw material is available consistently on time. That means your suppliers are supplying you on time. And okay, at least one of the equipment has more than 90% OEE on 24 into 365 basis. Only when you have both these conditions fulfilled can you say you have an operations problem. But if you have a purchasing problem, you cannot say it's an operations capacity. And hence, when we were talking about these constraints, market, operation, supplier, policy, it's a systematic way of moving, okay, and identifying the necessary conditions present and the sufficient conditions which will make sure that it is an operations or a capacity issue rather than any other. Because then we see people saying, sir, sometimes the supplier doesn't perform when the material is there, my machine is down, and things like that. No, only when raw material is available consistently on time more than 95% of the time, and you have a OEE of greater than 90% for any one of the equipment, can you say it is an operations constraint or a capacity constraint. Now, if you have to say you have a cash constraint, the three conditions should be satisfied. You are unable to pay suppliers on time, and suppliers have put a condition that they will only supply if you pay them in cash upfront. Okay, and you do not get material consistently on time. Should any one of these conditions not be met, it does not qualify to be a cash constraint. So when we are talking about constraints, as you see the simplicity, the necessary and sufficient conditions have to be met for you to classify yourself as the type of constraint and hence use the methodology for it. Okay, so these are the solutions available for TOC constraints: drum buffer rope for production and operation, rapid replenishment, distribution and supplier, critical chain for project management, thinking process for root cause or policy constraint, and mafia offer for market constraint. This is the driving principle for improvements. I will skip this. Okay. So when we are in a set of dependent activities, the 20-80 rule does not come into play. So in the throughput world, when we know we are a set of dependent activities, the rule is usually 0.1% controls the rest. And this is what we call a leverage point, or a place where you can jump the productivity of the organization for making sure that the throughput is constantly increasing. How do we increase it? By finding out the constraint and managing the constraint. Okay. Just give me 1 minute. I would need to start another presentation to come to the example. Okay. But before that, what we are trying to say here is we think that low cost is a competitive position. No. A decisive competitive edge is gained only when a company satisfies a significant market need to an extent that none of its significant competitors can. This is called your competitive edge. And please do not confuse value as competitive position. You might be offering some value to the customer, but that still does not mean it is your competitive advantage. Okay. First question to ask is the customer ready to pay for the value that you deliver? Rather than, can I give him low cost? If a customer values low cost, like I said, many of the companies will find out, okay, that it does not add to their productivity. Why? Because the demand will evaporate. When demand evaporates, throughput evaporates. So a competitive position is that position which helps you make more money than your competition. Okay. Just give me a minute. I need to open a new PPT and take you to an example of. Can you see this? Hello? Can you see this new PPT?
No, sir.
Okay, wait a minute. Can you?
It is being viewed as China's worst air disaster in the decade.
Is this visible now?
So it's visible, sir. Compromise is not a solution.
Yes. Take it. Okay. This is what I had mentioned. Okay. Now I'm just running through this because I have to come to an exercise. Okay. So just bear with me. Bear with me. This is what I've done with you. Okay. Yeah. Here. This is one exercise that we do to let people understand the power of constraints and how to manage constraints and how to identify constraints. And this is basically the anchor exercise through which we develop the whole idea about constraint management in an organization and how it impacts the performance. Okay. This exercise we do in a whole day training program, but I need to show you this so that I can take you to a small example that we generate out of this for what sometimes we mean about productivity increase or quantum jump in performance and how it impacts. Okay. And why is it many a times counterintuitive? Can you all see this?
Yes, sir, we can see that.
Okay. Now, this is nothing but the similar or the same exercise, but now because we need to do some calculations on it, I have to bring it in Excel. Okay. It is a very simple exercise. There are two products, P and Q. Okay. View full. Where is the full screen? Where's the full screen? Okay, let's leave it before I jam it up. Okay. So The P and Q are two products. Okay. P and Q. P is sold for $90 per unit. Q is sold for $100 per unit. Below that is the demand. 50 of Q and 100 of P. Okay. And below that, what we call is the process layout. How do you make P? How do you make Q? Naturally, you use machines called A, B, C, D, and you buy raw materials. Okay. RM1, RM2, RM3. Based on the bill of material that you have, you will do the multiplication, find out the quantity of raw material required, and also find out how much of resource time is required to produce it and sell. Okay, a very simple calculation. Okay, where we try to explain that there is a common material as well as the common resources used to produce two products. So what I have done here in this Excel sheet is I have taken the total available capacity for the machines is 2400 minutes because they work for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Okay, and then what I've done is I have calculated the number of minutes the resource P will require on each of these resources. And then I've done the similar calculation for Q. So to produce 50 items of Q, I would require 500 minutes of A, 1500 minutes of B, 250 minutes of C, and 250 minutes of D. Okay. Now, why do I do this? I think every company in this world should do this because this is how you find out how your capacity is being utilized. Now, I need to bring across one more example here. You see, raw material 2 is common to Q as common to P. So, if I have to make 150 units, that means 150 of P, sorry, 100 of P and 50 of Q, and one unit is common to both. So, I will have to make 150 units of raw material 2. Right? Now, what we see here in squares is nothing but utilization of my resources. So if I have to make raw material 2, it will be processed for 15 minutes on B, then it will go to C. At D, it gets assembled with raw material 3. Raw material 3 gets processed through machine A, which takes 10 minutes, then through B, which takes 15 minutes, and then comes to D. So what you see in product Q are two raw materials which use resources A, B, C, and D. RM2 and RM3 both require B resources, okay, of for 15 minutes each. Okay, so what we see is for making 100 units of P, I need 1500 minutes of A, 15 minutes per unit into 100. I need 1500 minutes of B, RM2. I require one of RM2, hence machine B is used. 15 minutes per unit, I need to make 100 units. So 1500 of B, similarly 1500 of C, and C similarly 1500 of D. For Q, I've already said, I sum it up. This is called total load. What we see here is the total load coming. When the availability load is 20, when the availability of minutes is 2400 minutes and the load is 3000, we know my B is a constraint. Is that clear? This resource is my constraint. Why? I have only 2400 minutes available with me, but the load is coming on 3. So the question with me is, what can I make? Right? I cannot produce 50 of Q and 100 of P, so I will take a call. Right? Now, at this point in time, when you are struggling what to make, okay, and you have a problem that you cannot produce ample, one guy comes to you. Please follow this example very clearly. One guy comes to you and says, sir, I will improve your throughput by making sure that I save 1 minute of operation on raw material 2 at the machine B. But sir, it will increase 3 minutes of operation on machine C. Is the example clear? In the current mode of working, The measurements of this increase is measured by cost. So as long as the machine B saves 1 minute, this is called an improvement. But if the machine C operation goes up by 3 minutes, the natural behavior is to say that if my overall operation time is going up by 2 minutes, how does it even qualify to be an improvement? Secondly, if I'm measuring the performance of C and till now it has been my ace performer, I'm making sure that the cost performance of the machine C is going down because it's taking longer to produce and hence it loses its efficiency. Such an improvement in the cost world is dumped. Okay, why is it done? Because it is not impacting any savings in cost. And naturally, if you're measuring two departments with local efficiencies, which department will allow another department to ruin their performance? Department C will get up and say, listen, B, okay, you don't hamper mine. If you want to reduce your time, you reduce your time. Okay, but you cannot increase my time. What I'm trying to bring across to you is there's a measurement of local efficiency, then there's a measurement of cost, which is rendering this example or this person's improvement initiative as wrong. And how it works out in the TOC world, okay, or in the TOC world by focusing and making changes is the example I want to show you right now. Okay, you need to give me 10 minutes because I will run you through a bit of calculation and show you how it works. Okay, so let's assume that just because I have a capacity constraint, I cannot make Q and P all together. I decide to make P first and Q next. Okay, I will make 100 of P, okay, which will consume 1500 minutes of B. Okay, I will be left with only 900 minutes, and to make Q, I will only be able to make 100 and only 30 minutes. Is that clear? 1500 minutes are gone here. I'm left with 900. Okay. Every unit of Q on B takes 30 minutes. Okay. So I can only make 30 of Q. Okay. Now every 100 of P is giving me a throughput of 45, selling price minus direct material price, and this is giving me 100 minus 40, 60. Okay, so my profit, my total throughput is 4500 and 1800. Okay, so if I sum it up, 6300. My total operation cost is OE is 6000. It's all there in the example. I'm not trying to, okay. So I have a profit of 300. Is that clear? I'll write it here, profit. Okay. Let us see, I'm making a profit of 300 with the same resources. Now let me bring you back to the joker who had come and said, yes, sir, I will reduce 1 minute on B for raw material 2 and increase 3 minutes on C. Let us look at how the things work. If this guy saves 1 minute on B, what is the total number of minutes that he has saved for processing raw material 2? Naturally 130, right? 100 of P is getting made, 30 of Q is getting made. 100 of 3, 100 of P, 30 of Q. Total minutes that he will save, minutes saved, will be 130. Is that clear? Now, if you have 130 extra minutes, what can you make? Yes, the total quantity I could have sold is 50 per week of Q. 50 per week of Q. Because of my capacity constraint, I was only able to make 30, right? So I still have 20 Q that I can make and sell. How much of time I have available with me now on the constraint? 130. How many number of pieces can I make out of this? If I divide 130 by 4, sorry, by 130 minutes available, divide by 30 minutes, okay? I can make 4 more, right? 0.33 I cannot sell, so let's assume I can make 4 more. What is the throughput I am getting from every 4? 60. So total increase in throughput is 240. Since my operating expense has already been taken care of, because I got a profit of 300, any throughput that increases now goes to the bottom line. Okay. So what is the increase in profit? This plus this 500. If you want to find out the percentage increase, what is the percentage increase? Earlier it was 300. Sorry, I got a 240 divided by 300. 80% jump in performance. Why am I calling it jump in performance? I'm calling it jump in performance for a simple reason that my goal is measured in throughput. Okay, and how much of my goal I have achieved is profit. So I have kept my operating expense same, and I've jumped my throughput, which impacted my profit. An 80% increase in profit, which is the global measurement, not a local measurement, okay, has caused the jump. Now comes the second part. The second part is, sir, you have saved only 1 minute here, but how about the three minutes increase there? So the moment I come to 3 minutes increase here, before I was utilizing only 250 minutes, 750 minutes of C. Now I have to make 4 extra units of C with an increase of 3 minutes. To this, I will add the overall numbers. In other words, instead of calculating C at 5, I will calculate C at 8, right? Let us look at what happens if I'm using this. So for making C 100 P, sorry, I'm using 134. So 130, 134 units total I'm making. And for each unit, I will be taking now 8 minutes, right? So let's do a calculation of increase load, sorry, CREASE, increase or let's say load on C now, new load on C. Was a load, I'm making 134 units, 134 units multiplied by 8. Sorry, it is increase. So the total load increase will be 134 into 3, right? That's a 3. So there's going to be an extra load of 400 minutes. The total load coming is 1740. I can easily add another 402 and still keep the capacity underutilized. $2,152. Let me repeat what I did. First, I calculated that what happens if this guy saves 1 minute of production time on resource B. If he saves 1 minute on production time, I have some capacity available at B, which I can use to manufacture some unfulfilled demand of Q. That caused a jump of nearly 240 rupees in my profit. Since operating expense was already looked after, all this increase in throughput went right down to the bottom line. So the profit went up. Earlier profit was 300, my profit jumped to 540. There was an 80% increase in profit. The negative impact of this reduction in production time at B was an increase of nearly 3 minutes on C. So with the increase in C, I'm making now 134 units. So 134 into 3, that is 402 minutes of C would be required extra. Just because there's enough capacity available on C, it did not make any difference, or it did not cause a capacity constraint on it, and hence the throughput could be achieved. Now, we have kept the operating expense constant. One would argue that 3 minutes extra will consume something. Okay, let's say it consumes electricity. It consumes whatever it is. The salary of the worker is already paid for. The machine is paid on a monthly installment, etc., etc. It's quite likely that only the tools and the electricity is going to be extra, which you can suitably minus from 540. Even if you minus 40, which is substantial, okay, you still have a jump of performance. When we talk about productivity jump, we talk about things like this. But to know where exactly to focus and how to work on what to focus on is called finding out the constraint. And for us in this example, the constraint is B. You can spin off 200 other policies in the company. Okay, 200 other policies. Sometimes it is also good to subcontract things from the machine B. But the moment you subcontract from machine B, your throughput goes down. If you are able to develop an operation C, which can do some operations from B, naturally the throughput remains within your company. It is not outsourced. So what people are talking about productivity jump, okay, is only called a productivity jump if it causes an increase in your throughput or profit. Here in this example, the efficiency of C is going down. Okay, and the utilization of B is going down because naturally you have some minutes spare to it. In the old world, a machine B, which is 100% utilized, is called a good machine. C will be called a bad machine. Why? Because it is not fully utilized. 2400 minutes of it is not utilized. How is it going to ever happen that how will you be able to load C more, etc., etc., and get the profit up? It's quite likely you will never know what is limiting the throughput and hence what is limiting the productivity of your organization if you don't understand that B is the constraint. And the methodology that we are seeing here is that we are not concerned with local efficiencies. We are only concerned with something that is going to increase my throughput and hence the overall operating profit. And how am I able to do it? Because I have those three measurements called throughput, operating expense, and inventory. Okay. This I am now coming back to my PPT to conclude that only when you have simplicity driving your performance or focusing mechanism can you find out what the constraint is, and only when you know the constraint can you jump the productivity. Because in the throughput world we talk about effectiveness, not efficiency. Efficiency is from the cost world, and if we start looking at the cost world and through the example I just quoted for you, it is quite unlikely that you are going to lead to a big jump in productivity or directly or indirectly to the performance of the company. Okay, that will be all. And can I come back to taking questions?
Yes, sir. We do have few questions for you.
Yes, go ahead.
How to calculate ROI and OTIF?
Okay, and may I know whose question is this? In case you have already have a.
ROI one is Rohit
Okay,
and OTIF one is from Valli.
okay. OTIF is called on time in full. Okay, and one of the simplest ways of measuring OTI is that the promise date that you have given to your customer, you multiply the throughput that you have achieved on that day. For example, you have 10 customers and you're giving them all 100 rupees of throughput every day, or let's say on a particular date. So 1000 of your throughput has to be dispatched on that day. Suppose you do not dispatch one customer's order. So your on time in full is only 90%. 90% of the total throughput that had to go on the time were you able to achieve. Now, if you're talking about on time in full, there's another catch to it. So let us say for the 10th customer, you were not able to dispatch all, it's okay. But for the 9th customer, you were only able to dispatch 90% of the order that he had requested. So the score for that order will also be 0. So only when the order is dispatched in full and on time, you get a score of 1. Otherwise, the score is 0. So you take the total number of orders that you had promised to dispatch on the date in full. If you have sent all, then you have a Otif of 100%. If you're only able to sell 7 out of the 10 in full, then your score is of 7. Okay, or 70%. And the second question was, how do I calculate ROI? There are two ways you can calculate ROI. You should start measuring only the TOC ways of ROI, because otherwise you'll not be able to measure ROI. ROI is usually a measurement in normal parlance used for assessing the project feasibility. But in day to day, to measure ROI in theory of constraints world, it's a very simple procedure and it goes like this. You take the throughput, from that you minus your operating expense, which is nothing but the profit, divided by the inventory that you have. And when I say inventory that you have, for day-to-day operation, you just look at the raw material inventory that you have. The raw material may be lying in your raw material goods or WIP or finished goods. They are all evaluated as raw material. They might be lying anywhere. So in TOC world, you just take the throughput that you have achieved minus the operating expense for the period and divide it by the total inventory that you have bought for the month. Okay? Any other question?
Yes, sir. How TOC differ from popular line balancing technique?
Yeah, may I know his name again, please? The person who's asked this question. Himali, may I know who's the person who's asked this question? Okay. If I'm audible, I will begin answering.
Name states new era. I'm not sure
Okay.
if it's the
ठीक है, ठीक. Okay,
name.
okay. It's
New
okay.
era.
It's okay. You see, what is line balancing? And if you say line balancing, I'm hearing that you understand a lot of lean. Okay. And
मेरा ही
uh,
network है।
and and line balancing is actually no technique. You cannot balance a line. Okay. So the first correction that I would suggest is you balance flow, you don't balance line. First rule. Now, what you're talking about line balancing is designing of how the material is going to be produced. Okay. And what we are talking in TOC is that you have to make sure that you are able to identify the constraint and manage the constraint well to get flow out. The difference between line balancing and TOC is the method of control. In TOC, we use time as a method of control. And in line balancing, we use inventory or Kanbans as method of control. Okay. So for line balancing, the first tool you will use is Hijunka, which again has two parts. One is the machine utilization part, and the second is the manpower utilization part. In theory of constraints, we use a technique called drum buffer rope to make sure that the flow is maintained. That means we detail schedule the constraint and we do not schedule anything else in detail. Okay. The reason why I'm not able to explain this in clear is there are two different philosophies. And when you really go down to the shop floor or how you manage a shop floor, line balancing is a design issue, not an operation issue. Okay, watch my word. Line balancing is a design issue, that how you have designed your line. The operation issue for line balancing is controlled by Hijunka. In TOC world, okay, we are making sure that the product mix complexity of the product mix is going to cause a load coming on my resource. And after I've calculated that resource, I work backwards to make sure I get the maximum product out. In line balancing, the complexity of the product is inbuilt into the design of the line. Okay. That's why I asked for the word. I asked who is this person asking this question, because these are two very, very complex situations to be explained in such a short time. Any other question?
So from Abhinav Acharya, he asked the question, how to limit or break down constraints like government policies from environment on business if they have impact on our throughput?
A government policy, okay, is out of your control. Rule number one. So anything out of your control has to be projected onto your inner controls. That means it has to be projected on areas where you have a control on. Okay. So in other words, the constraint will always be internal and not external. A government policy has got nothing to do with the way you manage your company. A government policy can have a restrictive impact on the market or your access to market, but that constraint is not your constraint. The only way you can say the government policy has got a constraint is when it impacts your demand, not anybody else's demand. There's enough demand of electronics vehicle in the market, but if you don't make a correct EV, okay, don't say that there's no demand. There's no demand for your vehicle. So government policy can have an impact on a demand, which is again external, but it has to be systematically converted into an internal constraint for you to handle it. Something which is out of your control is not your constraint. Okay, next question.
12
Himali, you're on mute.
people.
I'm so sorry. These are the only questions. And if
Okay.
anyone else wants to ask any other question, they can write to QCI. We'll forward it to sir. And with this, thank you so much, sir, for this enriching session. And thank you all the participants for their active participation. May I now request the audience to enable their cameras for a group photograph. This is for our record purpose.
These just a question. So all these chats will still be there. No? I can go back and watch before you shut off the meeting. Ashish?
Yes, it is going to be
Yes.
there.
Okay.
If
Okay.
you're
So
not
because
able to access, we'll share the questions with you.
no, it's okay
All the
because
chat.
there's so much of chats before I sign off. I would
Yes,
like to
yes,
just go through with it.
yes.
And anybody, please, I'll repeat again that this is this is just to bring to your notice that there is a far deeper body of knowledge and tools available to train you all for specific problems and issues, how to take it, how to implement it, how to start and everything. But that requires a day or two of training program. Okay. And you can send in that kind of request that I am, let's say, for example, a shop floor manager. How do I use TOC for shop floor? You can say I run a small company. How do I use TOC? And etc. like that. We will be able to design training programs for you all in detail with many exercises which can actually bring out the differences. Last time we did a training program, we sent everybody a simulator that you practice on it. And then if you are not able to practice or the problems that you face, make a list of those problems that you face, come to the training program and we'll tell you how to solve it. Okay. So these are very interactive and simulation based exercises. These are not theoretical. We can just in theory formulate a small problem. What I did today was probably 1/100th of what should have been done in a full-blown TOC approach. But I just hope you all enjoyed it, and always help Pooja, Ashish, and the team out when they reach out to you for training programs, and we'll be able to do it much better. One-on-one training. If should your company require that we need specific work for 5-6 people office, even that we will do. Okay. So we have a whole arsenal available, and these are just to make sure more and more people understand. Yes.
I hope the photograph has been taken, Ashish.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, sir. And
Okay.
thank you, everyone. We will also be sending a feedback form to all the participants. You are requested to provide us with your feedback as it plays an important role in our constant development. Once again, thank you so much, Bahadur sir, for making this webinar a success. And thank you all the participants as well. I would also like to thank the QCI NBQP team for organizing this webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you. Thanks.